Okay, all done. Now I'm going to have my heddle in neutral. I'm going to release some tension and I'm going to cut that from the loom. All right, let's roll it off and see how it looks. Very nice. It's going to undo my knots from the start. So the next step is to secure these edges, and the best way to do that is with a sewing machine or a serger. I'm going to serge my edges before I wet finish. If you're not sure how to wet finish, I have a video on that as well. Once we've wet finished and our pieces are dried, then we will go on to the sewing steps. Simple sewing steps, so you're not far away from finishing some lovely little notebook covers. Alright, so we've got our piece of cloth. This is all dried from being wet finished, and on the reverse side you'll see that I have all of these tails. So the first thing that I want to do is cut all of those tails off close to the fabric, being careful not to cut the fabric itself. It's super handy at this point to have a nice sharp pair of scissors. If you used a lot of colours like I did, then there will be a lot of tails. And it doesn't have to be perfect because this side of the fabric is not going to show, but you want to try and reduce the bulk of your edges as much as possible. So if you can cut it close to the fabric, it is better. Other side, same thing. Okay, so all edges, all the little tails are cut off. So I can now give this a bit of a press just to flatten it out nicely, just with a bit of steam. If you're not sure about what sort of yarns you've got in here and you're worried about pressing onto them, then you may want to use a presser cloth and use a lower setting on your iron. Alright, so this is the right side of my fabric and this is the wrong side. So I want to have the right side facing down at this point, and underneath I've got my black lining fabric that I'm going to use to cut out a piece, and just figuring out which way I'm going to do it. That way, so you can see what I'm doing. Now the idea with cutting out the lining fabric is you could cut it exactly the same size as this piece, but I'm going to cut mine a bit larger, and that's just because this fabric can move around a little bit while you're sewing it, It's preferable if it doesn't, and I'm going to use a lot of pins, but I do just want to give myself that extra bit of leeway if it does move around. So I'm cutting out a little bit wide. I'm also not worried about wasting a bit of this lining fabric because it's just a cheap fabric. Okay. Once again, nice sharp scissors are very handy. All right. So that is my lining fabric all cut out. I'm going to give that a quick press as well, just underneath. And then pop this back on top. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is to pin all of this together. And I'm going to want to use quite a few pins across here as well. I'll be taking them out obviously, and I won't be sewing in those areas. I'll just be sewing around the edges. But as I said, this cloth can move a bit, so I don't want that. So I'm starting by pinning in my edges where I'm actually going to be doing my sewing, all around the edges. Now when I come to pinning one end, and it doesn't matter which end it is, but it's got to be one of these short ends, we need to leave a gap in order to be able to turn this out the right way once we've finished sewing it. So I'm going to leave a fairly large gap, quite a few inches. So I'm putting one marker vertically and another one over this side as well, pinning vertically, and that means that I'm not to sew between those two. That's my no-go zone. But I'm going to pin on either side of those pins because I do want to stitch those parts. Making sure that you're keeping all of this flat while you're pinning it. And then I'm going to start pinning up this side, and when I come to this short edge, I'm going to pin the whole way along there because I only need to leave the gap at one end. So now that all of my border pins are in place where I'm going to be sewing, I'm going to put in, as I mentioned, a few of those extra pins, just here, there and everywhere, to try to prevent the moving of this fabric. So I've got all of those sides sewn up except for my little pocket, my little gap here. And I'm just going to give that a little press to make those fabrics agree with each other a little better. I didn't have too much movement this time, it was pretty good. And I'm going to flip that and just iron it on this side as well. Alright, now that we've done that, we can cut that excess of our lining fabric away. And the idea is just to cut it close to your base fabric. Cutting the corners. I'm just cutting the lining fabric corners at the moment. That helps when you're turning it out the right way to get nice sharp corners. And that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to turn it out the right way. So just pop my hand inside. Make sure you haven't got any pins left inside that are going to stab you. And just pull it through. And poke your fingers right into the corners, because corners always look nicer when they're just a little bit sharper and not too dull and rounded. I'm doing that on all my corners. And now we start to look like something good. All right, so we need to press that again so that we press those edges nice and flat, because we want to have them sitting as flat as we can. My fabric is pretty thick, and so if I can have those edges sitting flatter, it's much better. If you get any kind of flyaway edges of threads here, just cut them flush with the fabric. Okay, now we've still got this open edge to deal with, so we're going to just tuck that in. And the idea of doing this is you want it to look like there has never been a hole there, so you're tucking it in level with the parts that you've already sewn. And I'm going to press that, check it on this side as well, make sure it's staying where it's supposed to. Press, and I'm going to pin that in place, and I will hand sew that together. But I'm going to put the pins just to keep it all together for now, so that when I come to hand sew it, it's all easy, none of it's come unfolded or anything. The rest of this is done by hand. So this is what we've got. I've got another fluffy there that I'm just going to cut away. Checking for others, another one over here. And here, yeah. Just neatens it up a little bit if you don't have any fluffy bits sticking out. And there we go. So our next job is to hand sew this gap. So we just need a sewing needle and a length of thread that is going to blend with your weaving. I chose a black thread, and make sure it's a strong thread. I use Gutermann Sew-All because it's so reliably strong. And I will try to remember to link to that somewhere for you if you're not familiar with it, but it's what I use for all my sewing projects. All right, so let's see now. So I've got my pins along here. You remember that I pinned up this edge before. And I'm going to start where the gap begins, but I'm going to go in from the inside so that my thread is buried. So the thread's buried inside and it doesn't look like anything, you can't see it. Okay, so I'm going to do a kind of a ladder stitch, and you have to forgive me because I'm trying to get used to a new camera, and it's a great camera, but I'm still making friends with it, so hopefully this turns out okay. Okay, so I've got my thread on my lining side at the moment, and I'm just going to go through from the inside to my woven side and pull that through. And then I'm going to go back and go through the lining side. Just leaving the pins in place at the moment. Then back through the woven side. Okay, and then back over to the lining side. Back to the weaving side. This is like a sort of a ladder stitch, and you can see why, because you're just kind of stepping from one side to the other and then back again. And you just work your way along like that, sort of stepping forward with the ladder. And this then becomes an invisible stitch, which is why we do it. You don't have to worry about your pins as you go. You can just leave them in if it's a bother to take them out, and then take them out at the end. I left my hearth and home to travel far alone. I set my sights on the well, but found my true love was gone. I left my hearth and home to find that my true love was gone. So we carry that on right to the other edge of the gap, and then you can knot off and bury your knot in the other edge. So this is my first little notebook cover that I made, and I don't know if I mentioned before, but these are totally removable. So when you have finished with your notebook, you just take the cover off and you can put it on the next notebook, which makes it super handy because it's reusable. But for now, I need to use this book to figure out my dimensions, figure out which part I want to go on the front and which part I want to go on the back, and so on. So you're just going to lay it out, and these parts are going to come over and be sewn at the top and the bottom, and the same in the very back of the book. Here are all my scribbles. And it's just going to lay over like so, and so when you close it up, you'll have those parts sewn, and that will be your notebook cover. So I'm having a look, deciding which side I like better for the front. Oh yeah, I like this side better. definitely. And you want to try and have, for the front and the back, you want to try and have equal amounts coming in. So I think I need to move that one just slightly that way. And make sure that you lay the book out flat as well when you're fitting it, because if you don't, you're not allowing any room for the movement of the spine and so on. You'll find that the book is too tight. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that sort of placement. And I've got these bits sticking out at the moment, but when I sew them up, they're going to be sort of sandwiched together nice and tight. So if you're happy with your placement, you can put some pins in just to give yourself an indicator of where you want things to be at the top and the bottom. It's a bit hard to pin this properly, so I'm just kind of sticking my pins in there as markers. And I won't do the other side at the moment because I may stab myself doing that. So I'm going to focus on this side first. So if you can see from here, we're going to do a very similar thing to what we did before when we were closing the gap. We're going to use like a ladder stitch to sandwich these edges together. Have them nice and tight, and then they'll just hold on naturally to the edge of the book. So the only difference is this time I'm going to use the same thread, but I'm going to double it up so that it's extra strong. Alright, so I'm doubling up and tying a knot in the end. And it doesn't matter whether I start at the top or the bottom, just making sure, especially if you have, say, stripes, that your stripes are fairly well lined up. I just noticed here that I could give a little more, have a little more give there, because then my stripes will be more aligned. So I'm just going to re-pin that. Okay, so I think I'll start at this edge, and I'm just going to come in and bury my knot somewhere. I'm going to leave my pins there for now just to hold things in place for me, but I've got to be careful not to spike myself on them. So I'll pull through. And there I go with my ladder stitch again. Oh, it's getting wrapped around my pin. Goodbye, pin. Pulling nice and tight. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that when your needle's coming in, that it goes through some lining as well as through your hand woven fabric, because especially for my fairly thick hand woven fabric here, it's not a lot for the thread to hold on to. It's thick, but it's a little bit airy, whereas my lining fabric is a very tight weave. and so it's better if it goes through both. Coming up. Going down. Yeah, just repeating that, and we're going to go right to the end here. And that's going to bring those two pieces together. And then we're going to repeat that for our other edges, for this one and for the other side as well.